So welcome everybody. We're live on Facebook right now and live in Zoom as well. This is the 10th session in this Progressive Vaishnava conference called Out of the Box. There's been so many great sessions. I hope you've been able to tune into some on Friday and Saturday. There was 4 on each day. And today, this is the second of 4 today on Sunday. They are all available on demand after the session has been completed on the Progressive Vaishnava Facebook group, and they'll also be available then on YouTube in a little while. I'm just going to let some people in here to the Zoom room. So welcoming Krishna Kumari into the Zoom room. If you're listening on Facebook or you're listening here in Zoom, please do add your questions into the chat. We've had lots of great engagement, lots of really interesting questions from people on all the sessions. So do as the talk goes on, add your questions into the chat, and we'll bring them in as and when we can. So I'm going to just do a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to introduce you to Kisori Dasi and give you a little bit of background about her. So the talk in total will be about 90 minutes. There'll be time for questions and answers. We may take them at the end. We may take them as we go through, depending on when they come in. But Kishori is going to speak for probably about roughly 40 minutes or so, maybe a little more or less. And then we'll be taking questions. And we may, as I say, if questions come in the meantime, we may also address them as they come. So just a little bit of background to Kishori. Kishori today is speaking on the place in bhakti for science and other secular disciplines, and she's well placed for that. She's a doctor, and you'll hear a little bit more about her. So she was born and brought up in Fiji. She got interested in Krishna consciousness during high school, and then she studied to be a doctor. She got initiated in 2002, and I was quite happy to hear this, because it doesn't happen in every temple. She started regularly giving Sunday classes in the temple after that, which perhaps in all temples is not so common that ladies will do that. So that was nice to read that. She graduated medical school very shortly after that in 2003, and she got a gold medal and best student in a couple of areas in her studies. And then she, again, shortly after that, got married in 2004. She then moved to Australia a couple of years later, 2006, and she lived on the Sunshine Coast. They bought a local Govindas there from some other devotees, and they ran that while working full-time as a doctor, so that must have been busy. And then 3 years later, they sold the Govindas and then finally put down roots and set up a local GP practice. So she's acting as a GP now, and also does locum for emergency specialist services as well. And her hobbies are swimming, gardening, reading, writing, cooking, going out and communing with nature, and of course, devotional service. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome very much Kisori Dasi, and invite you to please tell us a little bit about the place in bhakti for science and other secular disciplines. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. And thank you very much for having me on. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm grateful for this platform to be able to speak something. I'm also really grateful to whoever thought of this title, because it's really thoughtful. When I was preparing for it, that came across. So thank you for that. And also, finally, but not the least, thanking Leanne Pota, also known as Haripriya Dasi, and Abhidaya Dasi, for having a hand in getting me on this podcast today. Well, not podcast, on this talk today. So my topic today is the place in bhakti for science and other secular disciplines. And just head straight into it, because it turns out there is a fair bit to say about this. So bhakti, as we may know or we may not know, is a solid foundation. It is well established. And I'll speak about more on this angle a bit later. So what we are doing is we are approaching this title, this whole subject, as the title states, approaching this from the angle of bhakti already being an established premise. And being followers or practitioners or capable well-wishers, even just curious, maybe none of the above, be the exact opposite of that, it is still well accepted. It is an established premise. So, so the definitions of bhakti and how it relates to science, I will delve into a little later. Firstly, so secular disciplines and sciences is it's actually a vast topic, and kind of affects many spheres, as many spheres as one could think of. And, to name a few, there's humanistic sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics, music, state governances, for example. Today, I'll be speaking on the sciences, secular sciences, and how it relates to bhakti and its place, the bhakti discipline. So secular obviously means religion or theistic views that are negated, that are not taken into account or are soundly refuted. And any science that does not take religion into account is defined as secular, or any school of thought or any subject matter. So to look at it from a bird's eye point of view, seems that there's two schools of thought, like science and there's theism. And it seems that twain shall never meet. Looking at it from one perspective, it can certainly seem that way, and it can certainly confound and perplex many people to speak of science and religion in the one breath. So one of the reasons for this, we can understand, is that science works on material principles, basically on the laws of this material world. And it works things that people can generally perceive with their senses, feel, can touch, perceive with our senses. And religion is the total opposite of this. It's the totally different realm. Spiritual cannot really be perceived by our senses, so to speak. In fact, we're told in the Bhakti tradition to see using our ears. We hear from our ears generally, but Bhakti tradition says we need to see using our ears through the eyes of the scripture. So another reason people find it hard to speak of Bhakti and science together, or seem to be perplexed by it and not really put in perspective, is unfortunately simply ignorance, according to the Bhagavad Gita. So the chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita, verses 10 and 11 say that the ignorant cannot understand why a particular type of body happens, why the soul leaves the body, etc., etc. So many things cannot be understood by the ignorant people. And unless one has spiritual knowledge, one cannot actually see things how they are going on. Example, the self, world, body, why different species exist, creation, origin of life. All these things are difficult for people to understand. And again, I actually happen to be reading chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, because this is the month of Purushottam, and that chapter is Purushottam Yoga. So it says that even though people may try to, they actually can't understand it unless they are on the transcendental path and seeing through the eyes of scripture. So these are the main two reasons people find it hard to grasp the concept of science and even remotely relate it to spiritual life. So I'll just talk a little bit about scientific sort of how the science world generally works. So science experiments, they work on very tightly controlled factors, very tightly controlled environment. And so I've studied science in high school, 7 years of high school, then 7 years of medical school. And then after that, another 5 to 7 years of specializing. In all these years of studying science, the basic forma template has been the same. And beauty is it's actually the same anywhere in the world. So this is true for science institutions all over the world. The 7-step, the scientific method. So the first step is having a question. The second step is doing some research about the question. The third is generating a hypothesis or theory as to how things will work. The fourth is experimenting, try to prove the hypothesis or disprove it. The fifth is data analysis. Sixth is the conclusion. The seventh is communicating the findings. So the communicating part, we might sort of be a little familiar with. That's how there's so many science journals. So all these experiments and all this research has been communicated by these science journals or other online platforms like PubMed, for example. So the other thing with scientific experiments is that to be of any worth, they have to be measurable and reproducible, and reproducible not only in terms of the method of it, but also the time it takes to do it, and they need to generate a consistent result all the time. So this is the scientific method, and one easy way to understand this is following a recipe, for example. Following a recipe, a cooking recipe, which most of us would be quite familiar with, is that it's you're doing the same thing, following the set of instructions, cooking for the length of time that's prescribed, and it's assumed that the result product that comes out will be the same as what looks in the picture. Hopefully, most of the time it doesn't. So one interesting thing I wanted to say about how tightly controlled science experiments and the scientific method is that me it kind of just raised that idea that it is trying to lord it over material nature, trying to be the controller and trying to be the boss of material nature, and really trying to control things, and not accounting for things that are out of this realm of perception. Okay, so very, very interestingly, actually I'll take a drink of water now. Excuse me. So very interestingly, the Srimad Bhagavatam also starts off with questions. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, as we know, is the cream of all the Vedic literatures. It's described that reading the Bhagavatam it's pretty much the only book one needs to read, really, and that it takes away the taste for reading all the other books, it says. So the Bhagavatam also starts with questions, and this really contrasts the difference between the scientific method and the spiritual method. How so? That the scientific method, as I just described, is following the ascending process. Ascending process meaning using our own senses to try to establish facts, and then disseminating it in journals, as I mentioned. So, and comparatively, the descending process is what, as practicing sadhakas, practicing devotees, we are used to doing. So the descending process, as described in the scriptures, is accept what is written in the scriptures with faith, even if we have no way of checking it out. We accept it. This faith comes from associating with others who have faith, and it also comes from mercy of Guru and Krishna. there's this verse, Guru Krishna Prasade Bhakti Lata Beach, the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila. And so it says the seed of devotional service, which is faith, is obtained by the mercy of Guru and the spiritual master, and Krishna, Guru and Krishna. So, so that's the descending process, the ascending process. So with the ascending process, with the scientific method, I don't think it's any mystery, any surprise to any of us that Srila Prabhupada, for one, he was actually pretty upset, pretty mad, scientists generally, and many a time we would hear comments like rascals or fools. I would say this. So, so I happened to be listening to Prabhupada's lectures on the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1 in particular. So Prabhupada really clearly, the first time I could actually understand what he was saying when he was saying fools and rascals. So what he was mad about was the fact that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and that scientists and other related disciplines, that they're seen as authority figures generally, and that therefore what they say is generally accepted people. And so what Prabhupada was actually upset about is that don't know the whole truth, or is the wrong information, that they're putting it across or pushing it across fact, that this is being accepted. This is what actually bothered Prabhupada. So we know that Prabhupada himself was a chemist, and it wasn't the fact that he was actually creating science as a discipline, but he was angry at the fact that people were being misled by so-called leaders. So we know with great power comes great responsibility. And that's a quote actually by Winston Churchill, popularized in recent times by Superman movies, in case nobody knows. So then, okay. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Adi Lila, in chapter 14, verse 32, there is a line in the purport actually. And what this says is that factually, in a higher sense, there is no difference between matter and spirit. So when I read this, I thought, oh, wow, that's saying something different. Because if we look at it, right from the beginning of our spiritual journeys, we are taught we are not the body, we are the soul, and that matter is inferior, spirit is superior. So how come this line, the purport, saying that actually we can say there is no difference between matter and spirit? So if we extrapolate this line a little bit more, we can therefore say that there's no difference between material subject matters such as science and spiritual subject matters. So how can we actually make sense of this? Because we do know that there is every difference in matter and spirit, and in science and spirit as well. So how we can understand this is that, well, firstly, know that matter is defined as being full of ignorance, of suffering, that it is temporary. And spirit, on the other hand, is defined as full of knowledge, full of bliss, and eternal. So there's a vast difference, the complete opposites of each other. But then, understand how there is no difference, therefore, we have to have the philosophical understanding as well as the practical application. And the philosophical understanding is that material energy is but an energy of the Lord, in addition to his other two energies, the marginal energy and the internal energy. And also that because this material energy is coming from the Lord himself, therefore it's not different. And secondly, to use this material energy in the Lord's service is therefore also making it not different from a higher point of view, a higher sense. So and from Prabhupada's classes, somewhere he says that use material energy in service to the Lord is actually Krishna consciousness. So that then ends up answering the title of this talk, is where is the place of science in bhakti? So just to go over that again really quickly. So material sciences are basically to be used in the bhakti process or on the spiritual path. So let's just take a brief mention of this psychological phenomenon called polarity. The polarity means having vastly opposing views in stark contrast to each other. So either very attracted or very repulsed. And we find that there are scientists who are very, very repelled the idea of a higher intelligence, a higher design. It's probably an indication that they are secretly attracted to it. And, for example, a boy really liking a girl, but giving her a hard time and teasing her, secretly actually liking her. So this is just an example of polarity. So there's a whole spectrum, and there are so many different titles given to different schools of thoughts. There's the theistic scientists, the atheistic scientists, the agnostics, there's the humanistic secular school of thought, and so many other different schools of thought, which is like a whole spectrum, like I said. And for agnostic, for example, they believe in science, not in God. And theistic scientists, they accept that there is a higher power at play because there's some things that we can't figure out, measure, explain. Atheistic scientists are soundly on the other end of the spectrum and completely disagree with the concept of a higher power. So I was actually doing a bit of research, and it was said that for an atheistic scientist to hear of a higher power or intelligent design is actually like their worst nightmare. So there's very strong feelings. So, okay. So then to kind of, I'm not really a scientist, so to speak. I'm a doctor and is really busy looking after patients. So there's any time spent doing research or study is actually a luxury. And, so I don't really sort of claim to be a theologian either. But, when we study the Bhagavad Gita, to try to make sense of where all these people are, the agnostics, the theistic, atheistic, and the humanistic, and everything in between, and all the other schools of thoughts in between, which, so many. So, if we look at Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 11, so this says, Ye yatamam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajami aham. So the answer is that everyone follows my path in all respects, son of Pita. And in the purpose, it said that everyone is searching for Krishna. They're doing it in their own ways, in their different ways. And they're doing it like looking at different aspects of his manifestation, almost like, the elephant and the four blind men, each feeling a different part of the elephant and saying, oh, he's like this or it's like that. So this purport I found really interesting, 4:11 of the Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna is all pervading, including within an atom. I'll get into that a little bit later. And that as all surrender unto Krishna, he rewards them accordingly, and that everyone follows the path, my path in all respects, O son of Krishna. So that we are all searching in our own ways. Krishna only realized his pure devotees in entirety. And that is actually Krishna that people are searching for, but they don't really realize this. And that Krishna's reciprocation is not just for the spiritualists. We hear of the Lord reciprocating with us perfectly, depending on how we relate to him. And in this purport, it said that it's not just for spiritualists. Krishna also reciprocates with materialists. And again, in the purport, it's explained exactly how in detail, which I won't really get into now. But to conclude this point, we are all the same path towards Krishna, but at different places on the path, and with different degrees of realization, which ranges from ignorance to full realization. So to get to the atom, so there's so many books. Excuse me. So there's so many books like Life Comes from Life, for example, Science of Self-Realization, and so many other books, the Bhagavatam as well, that there's descriptions of so many different scientific things, which I came across many times, in my studies, and I thought, wow, okay, this explains this part of medicine then. So, for example, transplant medicine, one of the things is what happens to the soul when there's a heart transplant. And, that question took a while to get an answer to. And basically the answer, after a few years of trying to find the right answer, was that the heart moves to a different part of the body. Sorry, not the heart. Soul, the recipient, moves to a different part of the body while the heart transplant is taking place, then moves back into the heart. Because why I'm saying this is because the soul, according to the scriptures, resides in the region of the heart. And it's 1/10,000 the tip size of a hair, which again, scientists haven't been able to measure the size of the soul. So, so getting back to the atoms then. So an atom is, of course, the basic building block of anything material. And an atom has a central nucleus, and it has an electron orbiting around it. Nucleus is made of protons and neutrons. And right in the center of the nucleus, there is something which scientists, again, haven't really been able to measure or name, find what this is. And this, as we know, is Krishna. So creation, the creative impetus that describes everything, that in the center of every atom is Krishna. So sort of coming to the script, having the answers. So okay. In the Bhagavatam, it said that it contains all the knowledge that there is to be known by man, both spiritual and material. And if one actually studies the Bhagavatam, we actually can see that. We can see that it does contain all the knowledge that is worth knowing, spiritually and materially. And it doesn't have the information about how to fix a broken car, but now that's something that is real material. But it has information like creation, how creation happened, as opposed to the Big Bang theory, as to how life originated. Life comes from life, how the different species came about, gating evolution and Darwin's theory, how time works, and the size of the soul, all the elements, biological senses, Sankhya philosophy, as well as origin of all the species, etc. It even talks about atoms in Canto 3. So everything scientific that confounds modern day scientists, atheistic, actually be easily solved through this descending process if one chooses to accept what is written in the scriptures. So also we are told that by studying of the Bhagavatam, what we are meant to be doing is absorbing it, and that as humans we need to devise a holistic working model, which then becomes the basis of one's outlook and one's activities in life. That code that we are working off is embedded within us, and that's the Bhagavatam. So in this way, then, there isn't really a schism of polarity of science versus bhakti, or what is bigger, and where exactly does it fit in. So by actually working off the scriptures, it really puts things in perspective. Okay, so moving on to the definition of bhakti, Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada says that bhakti is, and again, this is from his lectures on chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada says that he uses this shlok, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Uchyate. That using the body, all the bodily senses, serve Krishna, who is Rishikesha, master of the senses, this is bhakti. So why I'm defining bhakti is because it's in the title of this book, and I've defined science already. So in the Bhagavad Gita, again, it's mentioned what is intelligence, and intelligence is the ability to put things in the right perspective, the right ranking order. So using science for spiritual means the right order, according to the scriptures. Okay, so a few other, and I'm heading towards wrapping up, but not a few more minutes. So a few other things in no particular order is that again we hear Prabhupada saying chewing the chewed many times in his books, it said. And if you chewing the chewed, what actually it means is that, is it really new what science is professing to have discovered? Is it really progressive, or is it something that's already there? And some examples are, for example, in the scriptures, hear the story of Hanuman. And Hanuman, he was actually an embryo transfer, carried by the wind. So, that's pretty radical. And another example is Dasant. Dasant was born two halves, two different mothers. Both the halves were dead, pretty much, until a witch together, and then the child became whole. We have, like, here of conjoined twins, for example. We haven't really come across people being born in bits and pieces so far. Another example would be, and Jarasandha ultimately then he was killed by Bhimsen, and he was impossible to kill he was finally killed by Krishna giving Bhimsen the hint that you split him apart. He's actually joined in half. So that's how he was killed. Another example is 101 Kauravas. The one includes the female daughter of Gandhari. So 101 Kauravas, they were born as a lump of flesh, which was then cut into 101 pieces and grown test tube babies, you could say, except that they were grown in ghee pots of ghee till they were all grown up. So all of this and more, much more, happened in ancient times. And we know that, even sacred geometry, for example, Vastu, it is another science which, Ayurveda, all of that, all these Vedic sciences, they have been so amazing that in this day and age, it's actually hard to comprehend that those things could happen then. Why can't it happen now, sort of thing. So that's my understanding of hearing the truth. So recently, I watched this movie, which is pretty new. It's Mission Impossible, the latest Tom Cruise movie. And in it, there was this concept of an artificial intelligence, which was omnipresent and omniscient, knew everything and was everywhere, and could also distort things, distort past, distort future, therefore distort truth. And so it was sort of said a few times in the movie that this being or this thing actually change things completely. You won't know what is true anymore. So then I started thinking that, it's not much further from the truth as to what's going on in the world right now, that, things are changing and are not really aware of what truth is at an extent. So going back to Dharma, the bull, he has 3 legs broken. The one leg that is preserved is the leg of truth, Satyavata. That's the only leg that is remaining in Kali Yuga. So this truth is something that, can easily be played with, can easily be distorted. And my realization from that was that how can we actually hold on to it? How do we know what is reality and what is not? Because there's enough neurosis and psychosis around. So, and the answer to that for me was looking to the scriptures. Looking to the scriptures, all the absolute truths as well as the relative truths presented there. And that, the template for the future, the children, is just referring them to the scriptures and saying, teaching them from the scriptures so that they can distinguish between fact and fiction, really. So another movie to mention is The Man Who Knew Infinity. I don't know, I watched this a while ago, and this movie is about Srinivas Ramanujan, who was a great mathematician. And so he was really brilliant. He was, grew up in a slum, very poor, but was brilliant. He would do his maths on the floors of temples, writing down and solving problems like that. Then ultimately eventually he made it to the UK, where he was recognized for who he was, a brilliant scholar. And the end of it all, when he was asked, where do you get this formulae from? All these formulae that you are using and calculating, where do you get it from? And his answer was that Krishna comes in my dreams and he tells me. And of course he was ridiculed, but he was also believed to an extent. So So now the thing is that all these sciences, they actually come from Krishna originally, and that it's really us how we use this in our lives. So I've spoken some anti-science things, I've spoken some pro-science things, and now I'm actually going to speak finally about how bhakti itself is a science, but briefly. So the bhakti process, is described as a scientific process with measurable outcomes, with reproducible results, with consistent findings, all of them, as used in a modern scientific method. So, there's, for example, just to give an example, there is like 9 stages of yoga, starting from planting the seed of faith all the way to the 9th level, developing pure love of Godhead. So, and each of these stages, all the signs and symptoms described in so much detail by our spiritual predecessors. Like I find it very amazing myself. It's like this is the disease, hepatitis. These are the signs and symptoms of it. For example, all the stages of bhakti are described, and not just one part of it. There's like the whole process of discovering that we are the soul, we are meant to be serving the Lord, superior intelligence, a superior being. How do we do it? All of this is a scientific process called the science of self-realization. And it's very, very well explained in the scriptures. So finally, what I want to say, or actually a couple more real interesting things, that interesting for me at least, is that so when I was a medical student, obviously there's a lot of study involved. So some things, like I mentioned a little earlier, would be hard to kind of understand just using the medical textbooks. But when I'd opened the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam, and it made sense. So for me, it was always complementary. There wasn't ever any schism, like I said. And I found that, it gave me little answers, like, for example, the Bhagavad Gita early on, there's something about red cells circulating and where the force of it comes from. And then the answer is of course, it comes from the mechanical action of the heart. But where does that come from? That comes from the soul, the consciousness, and all the power. It's like the power switch, basically. So the other thing, that finer tissues of the brain need milk products. So then that made perfect sense, because the B vitamins, B12 in particular, can only be obtained from animal products. And milk is pretty much the only substance we consume as vegetarians. And that B vitamins, 12 in particular, is essential for neurological functions, so the brain and the nerves. So, me, more and more, it was really just adding up in all ways. And finally, so bhakti, as we know, and science also, as we know, practical is doing. So with science, and as I said earlier, using material nature to pursue spiritual pursuit, or using science to further our spiritual paths, is the answer. And so devotees are really ahead in this. And for example, there is many devotees that I know who work as psychologists, doctors, or nurses, or whatever, and they're really, really doing a lot of Vaishnava care using their profession. So, for example, people may or may not know, but there's there's an entity called the Bhakti Medical Association, BMA, and it's founded by Sundarananda Prabhu in the UK. And basically world over, the doctors like myself and other medical professionals, and also other branches like Ayurveda and naturopathic doctors. So they're all on there, and it's kind of like a second opinion stop. Basically, it's like, what pretty much most of us do in our capacity, to friends and family. But in this way, it's kind of like we can be contacted. So this is like a network, international network. Then also there is Karuna Care run by Ramboru. Also there are local. Karuna Care is a mental health and emotional support platform run by professionals. And there are local things like, for example, where I am at New Govardhan, we have a mental well-being, emotional support team, and so devotees are using their scientific backgrounds to help other devotees. And we know from the scriptures again that Vaishnava care actually gives rise to Namaruchi and Jiva Doya, which is the principal teaching of Lord Chaitanya, who is the incarnation for this particular age of Kali Yuga. So, using using whatever material ability we have, and in this instance, sciences, in Krishna's service, and really yield great results. And also, that our holistic worldview needs to be such that we are not negating, refuting, or denying the variety in the world and all the varieties of disciplines and sciences and information schools that there are, but instead trying to use it the Lord's service. So with that, I'd like to put my monologue and see if there's anything anyone would like to say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Kisori. It's no surprise that it was a very scientific and well-structured presentation. You took it very systematically through that, so I really appreciate that. I loved how you made that point, because it's very easy, I think, sometimes, particularly as devotees, to think just using the word scientists as if they're all the same, because obviously that's not correct. So you mentioned, the scientists come in all shapes and sizes. They may be theists, they could be atheists, they might be agnostic. And actually, I think any true scientist is actually trying to seek the truth in their own way, for sure. It's very much like whether they fall under theistic, atheistic, or agnostic, they pride themselves on the scientific method, which is they're really trying to analyze things as far as they see in as truthful a way as possible. There's no questions just now, so while we wait, if anyone wants to add any questions in, I just thought I'd share a few thoughts that came to me. I'd be interested to hear your reflections on them. So it's this question of, is the truth static? I don't believe it is. So therefore, even we have these different methods, we call them descending or ascending or whatever. But even the descending knowledge, we see over time, it appears to change. So maybe at one time, Vishnu was emphasized more than Krishna. Then later on, we see the introduction of worship of Radha. Then we have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So even within the descending process, things are being revealed. So my question, in a way, is, surely in one sense, science is the same, because at one point in time, they have a certain understanding, and then later on, they have a new understanding based on, something that's been revealed. Not to say that they're equal, not at all, but in their own way, they're equally, well, in their own way, they're valid ways of understanding things. And particularly, I know when Prabhupada was here in the 60s and early and 70s, science may have been one thing. Science, for what it is, not to overemphasize it, but like it has come a long way. I mean, there's some things they're doing now. You know, this electron kaleidoscope thing that they have, you know, somewhere in Belgium or somewhere. It's 18 miles around, and they can make these electrons spin around in it something like 18,000 times a second. And then they can do all these experiments. Now, you know, it is what it is. It's not, we don't have to overemphasize it, but it's amazing, you know, what they can do. And equally, I run a film company. I was recently at Warwick University, and we were filming with this neurological research department. And they were talking about this research on the brain. And they were saying, it's a bit of an ethical question, but they do experiments on rats. And they had this thing where they could train these rats to go down through an obstacle course in a particular way, so that, you know, maybe there was a better route than another route because they get a reward at the end or whatever. So the rat learns a certain route through an obstacle course. And then they can actually take the rat's brain out of their body and connect it to a little truck thing. And the rat perhaps thinks it's still alive. And they can actually, that brain can make that truck go the same route through the obstacle course. There's no heart, there's no body. So for me, so the next part of that is that I'm not threatened by that, because it, you know, it's so I feel like as devotees, we shouldn't be averse to science. We should almost be curious to see what they come up with, and then see how we can understand that or not understand that, or even it's good, I think, if it challenges our understanding, because it makes us then try and understand, well, how do these things synthesize? But because sometimes we have a very set way of understanding something, and then when something challenges it, I don't see it as a bad thing. I think it is something that we can, you know, it almost invites further exploration and deeper, you know, trying to understand. So these are some of the things that came to mind. And I just also feel, I'm not saying, I was lovely how you shared how devotees are using these different sciences and stuff, but I would also invite us to not forget that actually these things do have a value in and of themselves, whether or not we use them for devotional service. Like, we love going to a hospital and getting someone who knows what they're doing look after us, you know, no matter who we are. So they're actually, you know, significant in and of themselves. Sure, if we connect them to Krishna consciousness, then maybe they take on another level of significance. But I think that we shouldn't undervalue them, I think, even for what they are on their own. My personal opinion.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate what you had to say. I think I'll start from the bottom end. Yes, I completely agree with you. Yes, it's valuable enough in itself, and I also very much value going to hospital, finding somebody who actually knows what they're doing, who's not threatened by the fact that I also have to be a doctor, for example. It's really rare to find. And you know, recently had a presentation about trauma. So going to hospital, finding somebody who knows trauma-informed care, for example, it's really, really appreciative. Be they a devotee or not a devotee, that's just not even on the radar. The other things that you said is, yes, new frontiers are certainly being broken. Both in modern science as well as in spiritual realization. And one reason for this spiritually is because Krishna is unlimited. So he is ever changing and unlimited. And you know, in one way it says, only the devotee who knows me can come to me, or can realize all these truths about how everything works, but really it's kind of impossible to know Krishna fully. And you know, these new things, new to us at least, you know, which are coming across, are really marvelous, and they are really mind-boggling. Like so many things in the medical world, for example, can be treated now, which were impossible to detect before. Like, I'll give one little example, again using rats. And so rats' brains, again, were so basically what was found is that regular standard antidepressants, and like sertraline, like Zoloft, like Pristique, like all these ones, which work on chemical receptors, noradrenaline and sertraline, that they weren't really effective in people who'd suffered prolonged trauma. prolonged stress, that, they just weren't helping so much. So rats were used, and chemical levels were measured in their brain. And what was discovered is an older drug, much older drug called amitriptyline, which we use for everything and anything. We use it for neuropathic pain, use it for bedwetting in children, we use it for as a sleeping tablet sometimes, and we also use it as an antidepressant. So and we also use it for OCD type. So this drug was actually found to be newly discovered to be one of the most potent antihistamines. It was found that people who suffered prolonged trauma, even a significant trauma, a one-off, they had high levels of histamine in their brains. That this drug is an antihistamine, which therefore stopped all the histamine and was able to help with all the depressive symptoms. So it was kind of like killing two birds with one stone. Treat the depression as well as reduce the inflammation. So, and this was new. So, there's sort of new things being discovered every day. And what is really gratifying to see is that it's helping people in real life. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, one more thing, Prabhu. Sorry, one more thing. No problem. Is, what you were saying, how people are so skilled in doing so many things. So what came to my mind is Krishna is the ability in man, and he reveals things at different stages. He was giving this mathematician the formula in his dreams. So yes, that also came to mind.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an interesting, like, that's why I liked your kind of overall presentation was about, there doesn't need to be any kind of contradiction necessarily, like we can easily fall into, us and them and right and wrong and everything. So if Krishna is everywhere and he's everyone's heart, he equally is revealing all these amazing things through science as well. So we shouldn't be scared of it, really. Leanne Porter, who you mentioned earlier, she's left a nice comment on Facebook. I'll just read it out to you. She says, I love being reminded of the verse about everyone following Krishna's path. It's comforting to think this about friends and family who've passed on without knowing about Krishna. This is the first time I've considered it in relation to the work of atheistic scientists. It really makes sense. So yeah, it's nice.
Thank you. Yeah.
So that was a fantastic session. I really appreciate it. Thanks for you. Like I said, you definitely, I know you took time to really research it and plan it out, and it was really nicely presented and structured. So very much appreciate you for doing that. Thank you, Kisori.
Thank you, Prabhu. I certainly didn't feel as qualified as the previous speaker who had been supposed to do it originally. I just thought, let's say what I know and see how it goes.
Exactly. Yeah, good for you for stepping in, because it is daunting for people to do that, and that's one of the things that I've appreciated about this conference is that the conversations have been really honest, and we're talking about things, hopefully creating a space where it's okay to talk about things and different topics that are not maybe always, and also in a way which is not kind of inflammatory, in a way which is like seeking to understand and progress our thinking. So very much appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's been tuning in, whether on Facebook or on Zoom here, and also to anyone who listens to this after the event. I guess you can still leave your comments in the chat or questions, and if you tag Kisori, then I'm sure she'll be happy to come and give you a response. So thank you all, and look forward to, there's 2 more sessions today if you get a chance to tune in to those, and please do share the sessions, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.